there shouldn't be any tears tonight because I'm speaking, but hopefully it won't be painful. Sealing the deal, closing the sale. Most people in this country answer the phone by saying hello, but it always wasn't that way. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone, he expected people to say ahoy. It was too nautical for most people, so Thomas Edison suggested the word hello. Many people around the country, around the world, answer the phone differently. Russians will pick up the phone and say, I'm listening. The French will say, who's on the phone? The Italians will say, Germans will answer the phone by giving their last name. The Portuguese may say, I'm here. I say, yo, or yellow, sometimes. Sometimes I say, when somebody answers the phone, they'll say, hey. I'll say, hey is for cows. Aren't you glad you're a horse? That didn't go over well, did it? And of course, I have to say something about one of my family members who's not here. Milana has her phone go automatically to voicemail when I call, so I don't know what that means, but when it goes to voicemail, it says, hola, ¿cómo está? And then about 2 or 3 sentences that I have no idea what she's saying, and I don't think she does either. But anyway, people answer the phones differently. Isaiah said what? Here I am, send me. Jonah answered the call from God and said, here I am, I'm not going. God said to Jonah, arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for the evil has come up before me, in Jonah chapter 1, verse 2. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, in Jonah chapter 1, verse 3. If Jonah had been using a cell phone back then, he probably would have blocked God's number or just sent it right to voicemail. Moses, in Exodus chapter 3, he answered and said, here I am, send someone else. God came to Moses in the burning bush and said, come, I will. And Moses was reluctant to accept the call, and eventually said, my Lord, please send someone else. And that's in Exodus chapter 4, verse 13. He said, Lord, what you've got in mind is a great plan. I just don't think it's for me. I think someone else needs to answer this call. And then we get to Isaiah. Isaiah answered the call of God by saying, here I am, send me. And that's going to be our text for tonight, Isaiah chapter 6. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And then I said, here I am, send me. So my question for myself and for everybody here tonight is, what would lead a man to fully surrender his life to God like that? Because that's the kind of attitude I want to have. Show me what always the best. I don't have the best attitude all the time. Give me the eyes. I see the needs of others. I want to be able to pray to God and say to get involved wherever I know you have needed. God, my life is yours. Whatever you want, wherever you lead, here I am, send me. Unfortunately, I don't think all of us have that same attitude, and I know I don't all the time. So how do we get to that point? There are 3 things in our text that brought Isaiah to that point. First, Isaiah saw the majesty of God. If you look in chapter 6, verse 1 of Isaiah, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundation of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And that's verses 1 through 4. Isaiah had an incredible experience with God. He had an exceptional experience worshiping, listening, seeing all the things that happened. He came into the very presence of God, and he had a vision that changed his life dramatically. I believe that today our walk, our daily service, is proportional to our vision of God. I believe that our concept of God determines how much we love and how much we serve him. I believe that we worship God on the first day of the week. I believe the way that we worship God on the first day of the week has a lot to do with how we live the rest of the week. On Sunday mornings and Sunday nights, what happens to our attitudes? What happens to our life when Monday comes around and we have to deal with the world? We have to deal with people. We have to deal with real life experiences. Notice as Isaiah 6 opens that this is a dark time for God. His death and had a big impact on Isaiah, and that's understandable. The king had reigned for 52 years. He was the greatest king the Jews had known since the time of King David. But now the king is dead. Isaiah's heart was broken, not because the king died, but also because he was the friend of Isaiah. A couple things that Isaiah saw in this whole situation that made an impact on him. Notice where God is. God is seated at the right hand. God is seated on the throne, And it's important we understand that in our darkest hours, when things not seem to be working out, when life happens, when things happen, God is still on his throne. God is still in control. The Jews were struggling when they saw the Assyrian army surrounding them. They wanted to know, where is God? People that experienced 9/11 wanted to know, where is God? People that experience financial difficulties, when a spouse walks out on them, when a loved one dies, when someone gets sick, it may seem like God is nowhere around. But we need to constantly remind ourselves that God is still on his throne, God is still in control, and though we may not always understand exactly what's going on, God is still working to make things right. Second thing that Isaiah saw in all this, he saw the fullness of God. Notice in those verses how many times the word filled appears in the passage. The train of God's robe filled the temple. God's glory, his presence, filled the entire room. The whole earth is filled with his glory, and the house was filled with smoke. I don't know what you take away from those verses, but what I take away is if God's in the room taking up the entire space, there's not any time or place for anybody else or anything else, and our focus is truly on God. I've always told my children when things are rough, when things aren't going the way they should go, and I tell my coworkers and everybody else this too, if you put God first and put other people second, there's really no time for whining and complaining because your life is going to be busy handling the first two items. The third thing Isaiah saw was the holiness of God. The angels were flying around singing, "Holy, holy, holy. The whole earth is full of glory." That's in verse 3. And why do we sing holy, holy, holy? It's not because that's what's in the book, because the song was written like in 1869 or something like that. It's because Jews, when they wanted to emphasize something, they repeated it. They repeated it 3 times. And holy, holy, holy is the only time in the New Testament, in the Bible, that it's repeated. It doesn't say love 3 times. It doesn't say wrath 3 times. It doesn't say anything 3 times other than holy, holy, holy. And that's in reference to God. The fourth thing that Isaiah saw was the power of God. He experienced the building shaking. He experienced what he thought was an earthquake. The foundation of the temple shook. And Isaiah is made aware of the power of God. So we come together to worship God. We need to see God as he truly is. Sometimes it's amazing to me when I'm standing in the foyer doing what I'm supposed to be doing out there, and I see people talking to little Wyatt, going back to his classroom, making sure that he's got interact. Comment that just resonates in my head is, they're children of God. You have to love them. And I just want to kick her in the shin, but she's my wife and I can't do that. She might kick me back, you're right. But Isaiah was able to compare himself to other people, and he might have felt good about himself, kind of like we do. We compare ourselves to other people, those that aren't. All kinds of tests to compare ourselves to other people. But the truth of the matter is, when we compare ourselves to God, what happens? We don't. Peter says, Peter was there. Jesus helped Peter to gather a large catch of fish. And Peter's response was to say, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." And for years I struggled with that verse. I always wanted to understand it a little bit better. And it just hit me one day. Peter finally recognized he was in the presence of God. He recognized that Jesus was who Jesus said he was. And he finally realized that he was not worthy to be in his presence. Why would Peter say something like that? Jesus catches a lot of fish. Peter talks about his sinfulness. I don't know. Maybe that's an example for us for an easy segue for somebody who likes to fish. I don't know. But the main point is we're not worthy to be in God's presence, but we need to understand that that's where we need to be. Our worship service needs to be a time of reflection. It needs to be a time of thought and self-examination. Oftentimes I think we come in here and we put on the parade. We do the songs, the prayers, the sermon, more songs, and then we get up and we leave. I think that we really need to find out for ourselves while we're here, are we really the light and the salt that we need to be for those that are around us, for those that are not here? Are we able to figure out what we're here for? And are we really willing to surrender ourselves to God? In worship, we should experience God's grace. If you look at Isaiah in verse 6, it says, "Then one of the seraphim flew to him, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away. Your sin is atoned for." I don't think that we fully understand that God sent Jesus to die on the cross. I think sometimes we do, but I don't think we do it often enough. Our worship is really not complete until we feel the forgiveness of God. Until you've come to that point in your life when you can say, I'm still a sinner, but I still have God's forgiveness, and you're able to walk forward. If you look at verse 8, what does it say? "And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me." It's only after Isaiah sees God for who God really is, after he sees himself for who he is, and after he is touched by God's forgiveness, that Isaiah is ready to properly respond to God, to go out and to do the Lord's work. But notice that Isaiah didn't say, "God, where do you want me to go? God, what's in it for me?" Strike a bargain with God. He didn't attempt to negotiate a compromise. He just said, "I'm answering the call." God called, Isaiah answered. God commanded, Isaiah obeyed. That's the kind of unconditional response we need to have. How many of us are like Isaiah, ready to go, ready to live for God daily, ready to stand up and say, "Pick me, send me. I want to do a job. I want to teach a class. I want to talk to somebody about Christ. I want to minister to the sick and those in need. I want to be involved in the needs of this community." Unfortunately, there are many times where we would rather respond like Moses. "Here I am, but send somebody else." In our worship, we need to see God as he is. But the result of our worship should be that we see the need to surrender ourselves. Surrender means to no longer live my life, my purpose, my plans, my ideas, but his. Paul said, Paul said, "Christ, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." Isaiah said, "Here I am, send me." It wasn't that Isaiah thought he was better than anybody else, or he was smarter than anybody else, or he had better resources because of his position in life. He said, "No, I'll go," because he had seen the glory of God and what it was doing for him. Tonight, there may be some of you here that want to know the glory of God. Some of you may be here just for the parade. Some of you may be here because you have things on your heart that you want to talk about. The elders are here. be willing to work with you and talk to you. We need to remember that worship is coming into the presence of God, being driven to our knees by His majesty. Worship is giving God the glory, honor, and praise so that He richly deserves. And if we do that, we'll move closer to Him. We'll be able to get through our weaknesses and our sinfulness. Worship is an opportunity to take hold of the grace and forgiveness that God offers. And the end result should be that we're re-energized, and we're ready to go. We're ready to serve our community. So I ask you this question. Have you closed the deal with God? Is your contract in place with God? Have you completed the sale? Are you ready to serve? Are you ready to help? A sign in many churches today says, "May we enter to worship and depart to serve. Lord, here I am, send me." And I want to remind you in the end, when all this is said and done through my scrambled words, that God is still on the throne. God is still in control, and God is still God. If you have any questions or concerns or need prayers of the church, please come forward as we stand and sing.
Jesus is standing in Pilate's hall, friendless.